Welcome to LifeWorks Today. This podcast is provided so that together we can create a world in which all people love their lives. Our current human systems aren't working. The way of superior versus inferior, or management versus employee, or adult versus child. We need a powerful, positive, and sustainable transformation. This podcast is for you who seek to be happy, fulfilled, and peaceful so that your abundant life works today.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of LifeWorks Today. Our episode is called When Everything Falls to Pieces, How Uncertainty and Change Can Foster Growth Rather than Chaos and Failure. And oh my gosh, it sure feels like everything's falling to pieces. There will be more change in the next 10 years than we've had in the last 100 years. Uncertainty and changes aren't new. They've been increasing exponentially. And now our human window of tolerance has been stretched to the limit more than ever. As a global civilization, we've been catapulted into the awareness that we need new techno-human ecosystems. Wow, that's a mouthful. I'm going to have a guest that's going to really help you understand what all that means. But these systems help people to increase emotional stability and resiliency, because how we react, adapt, and evolve will become the measure of our success individually, as communities, and as nations. Together with my guest today, we'll be sharing our vision of just some of the game-changing systems that are needed to fortify resilience and help us all to reach the other side of crises intact and thriving. In my recent episodes, I've shared the importance of certain conditions and conversations that keep people out of what Adler called the inferiority complex and the resulting uninterrupted struggles that happen inside of us and between us. I shared how we need to help each other to build courage and motivation from the inside out. I shared why the fostering of personal responsibility, social interests, where we care about what we're causing each other, and emotional intelligence is happening on a regular basis and for everyone. Consistency and breaking down outdated imbalances of power are really key to creating further experiences that support our healing and our regeneration on every level, especially as we go through traumatic circumstances. So in today's episode, the compelling questions that I want to address are, what is trauma-informed? What does that mean? And why is it important to understand, especially in recent times and as we move into the future? What is this thing called power distance index? That's something that I recently learned about and I want to share with you, and how it fits into the discussions on creating supportive conditions, responsibility-based, trauma-informed conditions. And what exactly are techno-human ecosystems? And why should we be excited to understand and to even embrace those? So there are at least 5 requirements for a high-functioning trauma-informed culture. And I'm going to be speaking about these in greater depth with my guest today. But I want you to keep in mind that when people go through hard times, when they're under stress, they need to feel a sense of safety. They need to know that there are spaces where they can go and feel emotionally and physically safe, and where they can practice openness and get support even when they're in discomfort or unease. They need to know they can be open, unapologetic, transparent, and trustworthy, and have trustworthiness with other people. They need to feel like there are choices, that there's real healthy collaboration and mutuality of respect, of equality, of care, and they need to feel empowered. So if you've listened to those earlier episodes, you might recognize that the work of LifeWorks systems includes all of these characteristics. In fact, over a year ago, a colleague and friend of mine, Jacob Perkins, told me that I had created a trauma-informed system. I didn't even know what that meant. And that's why I'm happy to introduce you to Jacob and invite him to have this conversation with me today for the benefit of many people. Before I go into the full introduction on Jacob, I want to share with you a quote that I brought to this podcast. And it's really apt that it's by Abraham Maslow. And basically he's saying, in general, only a child who feels safe dares to grow forward healthily. His safety needs must be gratified. He can't be pushed ahead because the ungratified safety needs will remain forever underground, always calling for satisfaction. And I think a lot of us are really in that place where we're trying to find our safety needs. So who better than Jacob Perkins to tell you a little bit more about what it is to be trauma informed? So I want to just tell you, I met Jacob a couple years ago, and he is a person who has, I always tell him he's got a big brain and a big heart because he's very empathetic, and he also values systems and studies a lot of different disciplines. He is even called a transdisciplinary practitioner. And he has over a decade serving across many human service systems. So he's really smart. I always learn new things from him. He has an eclectic background, including his master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis, and his training and research in clinical practice, transdisciplinary science, and globalization. You will find him nowadays serving passionately in the emergency room, advising emerging practitioners, conducting health research, or giving pro bono project consulting. Welcome to the show, Jacob Perkins.
Hey, thanks, Judy. I appreciate all those kind words.
I appreciate everything you're doing and the bravery that you have every single day as you go into those emergency rooms. You know that we all have a real appreciation of that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a servant, but there's so many big servants right now. I have friends who are nurses, friends who are ED physicians, and many of them are out there right now, not just picking up shifts, but dealing with some of the other issues that kind of are pervasive across these healthcare systems. So I would say that they're all in it together right now. And so it is stressful, but it's also very inspiring to see the supportive stance that those frontline healthcare providers are giving each other right now.
Yes. And so how does that fit into what we're going to be talking about today? Because really, I tried to sort of give a few characteristics of trauma informed, but why don't you go ahead and tell the audience what that's all about and why that matters?
Yeah, for me as a provider in healthcare, I mean, trauma-informed care is something that we've been talking about for a while now. You know, a lot of the large-scale healthcare agencies and nonprofits, they've pursued trauma-informed care over the last 3 to 5 years. Here in St. Louis in particular, we have some learning collaborative initiatives that seek to link all the different service providers across different human service systems and kind of make them strive for trauma-informed care. And when I say trauma-informed care, what I'm really talking about is a set of policies and practices which focus on acknowledging the kind of common experiences we all can have that are either A, severely traumatic, that's what we call big T trauma, so that's things like assault, abuse, a severe accident, something that we can all kind of recognize that would disrupt lives, but also the little T traumas we have. So the level of stress, let's say, that whole communities are experiencing right now with both the level of infection and fatalities. So we kind of see how those little T's are pervasive and common to everyone, but overall there's still big T traumas a lot of the times that we don't even talk about, but they do impact a large segment of our society and of course can last over the lifespan and interrupt our life at various points depending on where we're at and what's going on, whether it be work or home life.
You know, I think it's interesting how you talked about it as big T and little t, because actually I think most of us are pretty forgiving and supportive for big T experiences that people go through. But a lot of times we don't even want to admit our own little T experiences. Are you find that true?
I do find that true. You know, certainly I know survivors of child abuse and neglect and sexual trauma who have not confronted or addressed kind of some of the experiences they've had. But then certainly in the larger workforce and even in the larger society, you know, we go through stressor, and we might even acknowledge it as a stressor, but it can have a definitive impact on our coping skills, on our window of tolerance, and on our ability to perform across both the workplace and in our home with our families. And so I think it's important to have larger conversations about those little T's and what that means for people embedded in spaces and in groups.
Yeah, I know for myself, I in the last couple of years was really able to call something a trauma that really had been a trauma. And I was afraid to even use that word or even use the word that I had been victimized in something, because most of us don't want to be a victim. We don't want to feel like one. We don't want to claim to be one. We don't want to even have that hanging over us. But the reality is, for many people, once they've had a traumatic experience, even if it seems small, if they can't call it what it is and move past it, I don't think the healing can really occur. And so I'm glad we're even just using the word trauma, because it sounds like it's real dramatic, but it can be as simple as, somebody doing something to you in a way that just makes you feel completely shook to the core of who you are.
Yeah, and then we bottle up that experience and we stuff it, as I would say, individually with a patient in session. It may or may not manifest itself immediately in certain coping patterns or behaviors, but when you do that enough, it can overflow and it can manifest itself in other ways. And that could be the workplace, that could be the home life. But as we know, the home life and your work functioning and performance are related. So, it's important to have this kind of trauma-informed lens when we're trying to focus on human systems.
Well, and I want to just bring something into the conversation that kind of will tie together for those of the listeners that have heard the former episodes, especially the first one, which was called Spitting in the Soup. Jacob, I don't know if you've heard it or not, but it was really about the problems that come with using control over people. And I just happened to be rereading a Malcolm Gladwell book this weekend, and it really tied in with what we were going to be talking about, even in terms of trauma. And it was about what's called the power distancing index. I don't know if you've even heard of that.
Yes,
but
I
it's have. Okay, good. I knew you would. I hadn't heard of it. But for those of you in the audience, what was so interesting is Malcolm Gladwell was talking in this book about these really high levels of Korean airplane crashes. And what they came to discover is that because of the way the culture of the Korean people was managed, people had an inordinate amount of distance from power. So they felt as if they had to be very subjugated to the power structure. So what would happen is sometimes these co-pilots would be in an airplane and there would be mistakes being made, fuel being lost, crisis occurring, and they didn't know how to overcome their fear of approaching the authority figure. And so what happened is they had this inordinate amount of plane crashes until they could help the co-pilots learn how to shorten the distance between the authority figure and the people that are reporting to the authority figure. And I just thought that was so fitting with trauma, because sometimes our biggest traumas are managing relationships with authority figures.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of, I talked about big tree and little T traumas earlier. The nature of big T is, unfortunately, they tend to occur in the context of a power dynamic. So an example would be intimate partner violence. And we can think of like a historical example of a male who might have more physical, financial, and try to perpetuate emotional power, unfortunately, through toxic dynamics or force. And that worker, let's say that frontline staff might be a female and carry that over from either a prior relationship or maybe her current relationship into the workplace. And you might have a high power industry that person's working in, and the managers don't necessarily see it as a problem, but they're not seeing the big T trauma that frontline worker that they're engaging might carry with them in there. And so there are implications for how people are responding to high power index groups or industries right now. I would say as an aggregate, the United States is about middle of the road. At least some of the surveys that I've looked for power distance index, it's a pretty solid construct across comparative management studies.
Well, Jacob, do you know where the narrowest distance are? What cultures have the
Nordic. By far, the Nordic countries do. The U.S. is at the lower end, but it's not the lowest. The lowest are the Nordic countries right now. Those tend to be culturally more communal, and so that tends to be low power distance because they're more relational.
So I hope that you that are listening understand what we're talking about here. We're really saying that the use of power in itself is a source of pretty significant variations of trauma on people. And it can be male, female, but it can also just be boss, employee, a parent, child. I mean, any place that anybody feels that they have this hold over somebody else and the other person believes it. I talked about this in a former episode, how the most important relationship to manage is the one you have with authority figures, people that you believe have power over you. And that's a tough one, no matter if you're male, female, or whatever age you are. So I don't want to get too far afield, Jacob. Is there more that you wanted to say about trauma-informed in general? Because when you said to me, do you know you've created a trauma-informed culture? Will you tell me what you see in a trauma-informed culture so that other people can recognize that?
Being a trauma-informed workplace would require me to acknowledge, one, the prevalence of big T, but more importantly, little T traumas. And because I'm acknowledging that, what I'm really acknowledging is the kind of universality of human beings and how they respond to stress. Trauma is just another word for stress. So what we're really talking about is stress responses in human beings and what that means. So, we're talking about big T and possibly having a workplace subordinate that has a history of big T trauma. We have a workplace subordinate that has a history of little t trauma, and we need to be aware of that. That person under periods of extreme stress might have a lot of, and I'm going to use the technical term, central nervous system upregulation, which basically means they're going to be kind of hypervigilant and restless. And
Yep,
that's going to
carry
carry
going
over.
on right now.
There's a lot of that going on right now. Everyone has central nervous system upregulation right now. Everyone's hypervigilant. They're restless. They're having some anxiety. Those are stress responses. And it might be short term. It might be that people are going to get back to business as usual in the next 2 months, and people are going to kind of calm down. But we're not able to say, well, 90% of my workforce, this is the first time they've ever had something like this. And so they'll just get back to business as usual and be fine. And then relations will go back to the way they are 3 months from now. What we don't see is that chances are probably there's a lot more big T's and a lot more little T's in my overall workforce's life. This could be that one critical event which activated someone's central nervous system, and it's being activated too long. And there's going to be all these other kind of secondary mechanisms that are activated, and it's going to lead to, for lack of a better word, stress, depressive, and anxious responses. And that might be enduring. So in other words, you could have some elevated mental health in your workforce, and that's going to disrupt performance. That's going to disrupt self-care. That's going to disrupt workplace interactions. Maybe you're going to have a subset of your workforce that are going to have some pretty negative behaviors by your standards that you might need to address. So I wouldn't undercut what could happen here in the long term. So if we're really trauma informed, then we're going to take a stance that we're going to come in during those management employee interactions. We're going to kind of acknowledge and validate what's going on, but also be assertive enough to relay what our expectations are for performance. But we're always moving forward with the lens that everyone we're working with is a human being that can be empowered, that deserves to feel safe, that could be having elevated stress responses right now. But we're going to be transparent enough to tell them what our expectations are, but also help them. And that's
to help them. Yeah.
That's going to give them the choice. That's going to foster trustworthiness. That's going to certainly be a collaboration if we're having a conversation. And it's going to empower them. And when we take that stance, that's pretty low power distance. That's pretty relational.
That creates the closeness. Even if we're physically distancing, we're more emotionally closer through that. I want to just pull the lens back a little bit, because the pandemic is a really great example of people being under stress, higher stress than normal, having all these stress reactions. But I also know that you and I have talked for a long time about the stress of just the speed of change, how much complexity the world has been entering, and how that's going to continue to grow. And also just the importance of paying attention to what we're called to be, like just even being called to be able to pivot quickly to meet the needs of the marketplace, or pivot quickly to be in some of the more evolved states of culture. And I want to bring that up because the pandemic will come and go, and it will have its long-term and short-term effects. But the fact of it is, we've always had a lot of our work in the area of mergers and acquisitions. That's been a big part of our business, has been mergers and acquisitions, because a person's ability to manage trauma and stress just comes out more when everything's shook up for them. So we've seen organizations like right now, one of our clients who's been in the culture model that they've been using, which is our culture model for the last 3 years, they're just blown away by how they're rocking it. And they're in healthcare. They're just rocking what they're doing, their teamwork, what they're accomplishing. And part of that is all of the hard work they put into to create a trauma-informed, I never called it that, but it really is a trauma-informed environment. So even though they had been doing this before anything big came along, it's really shown itself. Can you speak a little bit to that, Jacob?
Yeah, the business context we're working in right now is a 21st century globalized world. By definition, globalization did two things. It sped up, so we can think that speed's increased, and with this increase in speed is a secondary increase in time and place. So the epidemic is the perfect example right now. One, overall, having an increase in epidemics or risk of epidemics is part of globalization. So I'm not surprised that we're all kind of talking about these topics right now. You mentioned speed right now, acquisitions, mergers, shift, change, declines in supply chain, new customer bases, emerging markets. the pace of the business professional is ever increasing. So
Hmm.
much so that we can't necessarily predict, and we can't necessarily get our mindset where it should be necessarily. So I talked earlier about central nervous system upregulation. If you're a business professional right now for a large multinational corporation and you're at a certain level, you're going to be moving at a pretty intense pace. And that pace is pretty much going to mean that your body doesn't really have a circadian rhythm, is always under a high level of stress. It's almost comparable to having a prolonged little t.
Yes.
So when we have these systems in place that kind of guide us and foster empowerment and foster self-care and foster healthy relationships and move us away from engaging in toxic workplace patterns, we're more likely to be resilient towards dealing with that prolonged state of stress that we're under. But that's the nature of the business world that we're kind of keeping up in. Nothing
Yeah.
is really logistic. It's not linear. Growth is exponential, and it's in many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in that respect, I think the speed of change, the complexity, the stressors, all of it, whether it's the pandemic or outside of the pandemic, all of it is an opportunity to shore up the conditions and conversations that we engage in on a regular basis that either strengthen us or, really take us down. And so I love it that you are always watching for what are all the disciplines that bring about a stronger, more resilient human being, and what are the systems that we want to dismantle. So we're going to go into that whole thing about what is a techno-human ecosystem, because that sounds like something from outer space. And it is very, very real. And I want people to understand what it is and how to be excited about it, because it's important that systems thinking becomes something that you can latch onto for a sense of safety and a sense of security and a sense of assessment. But before we do that, I just want to take a minute to remind our listeners a little bit about LifeWorks Systems. My company, LifeWorks Systems, was formed in 2002, and we specialize in performance management through healthy culture transformation. So we're actually using that transformation to improve the way people manage their stress, the way that they manage their jobs, the way that they manage their relationships. So I just ask that you consider going to our website to learn more about LifeWorks Systems and how to get involved with us, including access to information related to both today's episode, but also all the former episodes and the ones to come. You can find us at lifeworksystems.com. You can subscribe to our podcast. You can find the main points on each podcast and a list of all of them. And we also invite you to join our mailing list so that you receive information on free videos, webinars, articles, free surveys. My book is on there free. There's all kinds of things. And we'd really like you to know how to contact us by phone and by email. So all of that's there for you. We hope that you'll take some action into that. So, Jacob, now let's get back to that little bit of a cliffhanger there. What the heck is techno-human ecosystems? Help people understand what that is.
All right. So before we get there, we have to understand what resiliency is. So resiliency is the capacity of a system to deal with change and to continuously develop. We've had resiliency discussions in terms of systems and systems dynamics for the better part of 40, 50 years now. It's been a pretty prominent discussion across modern disciplines. Resiliency, of course, says it's overall the capacity of a system to use instances of disruption, like right now in our globalized world and what's going on, to kind of spur renewal and innovative thinking. The issue is that technology is becoming such a more dominant force that we really need to include it with our view of human systems so that we're really talking about one system and how they're connected. So the techno-human ecosystem refers to a fusion of our meta-consciousness, which is kind of like our max awareness of everything we are as a group of people or as a single person. So my meta-consciousness right now would include my awareness of my body, my limits, my pain, my joy, anything that's like an inner phenomenon that we can talk about from a psycho-emotional standpoint. If I want to talk about a workforce, I could talk about the cumulative awareness and kind of the collective consciousness that my groups might have. We might put in some terms like synergy there, how they might maximize each other's overall benefits to get to a goal or an outcome. But what we need to throw in there with techno-human ecosystem is the integration of technology into this awareness. So now everyone's on remote work. This is a perfect example for now. How does my daily routine and how I connect to remote work impact my emotions, my awareness, my connection to my community, my workforce, and this larger world. And how does that relate to my performance and my self-care when I'm not on the job or I'm not doing that business, whatever at some moment in time, whatever that task is.
Well, you know what, Jacob, even when you say the word technology, to many people, that's a small T right there. Maybe even for some people, a big T. Because they're still like, I don't even know how to use my smartphone, people will say,
That's the question we have to have, and I'll talk about that in a second. So going back to resiliency, at the macro level are going to include questions of what's the pace of technological growth and what's that disjunction between the techno and the social. So now I have my entire workforce remotely. Let's say before maybe 15% of my workforce was remotely. Well, now I got 75 because of what just happened in our world. How is that impacting them as human beings? What does that mean for the service or the product I'm trying to produce? So that's the resiliency questions we have to ask. Am I resilient right now, given my new platform for my employees to work?
Oh my gosh, and to pull this into the context of letting go of control systems, imagine those leaders who are used to controlling through policing and oversight and helicoptering, and whether you're a parent or a business leader.
And now having to take a network model, which doesn't fit well if you have high power distance index. A network model for your business will not work well with power distance because by definition people are working remotely and supposed to be working independently. So then ideas of self-motivation, your ability to process, your ability to stay connected even though you might not be through technology. Let's throw in some other questions here. Maybe there's a generational effect. You have a younger workforce, so there isn't a generational effect. You have an older workforce because you're an older industry or an industry which might rely on people who might be, because age might be correlated with educational attainment depending on your workforce and your industry. So we could say there could be a generational difference. Younger generations might be more comfortable with this. So there's all these other questions that come into play at the macro level. It could be related to the total resiliency that you have right now. And then at the micro level in there, and you kind of brought this up a second ago, questions for the techno-human ecosystem might be discussions of, well, what's the role of emotional and cultural intelligence if I'm trying to get all these teams to work? Since everything is so fast-paced and intense, do I train a bunch of generalists? I don't have any specialists? Is everyone cross-trained? Is everyone cross-trained remotely? So there's a whole bunch of other questions that come, not just on the how do I manage people aspect, but what type of people should I have? And all that end goal should be to be agile enough to be able to tilt and keep up with your service line or your product when you need to, because as we know right now, globalization and the fourth industrial revolution go hand in hand, and so change is pretty fast.
Change is very fast. And I think even words like agile, people don't even know what the heck does that mean, Yeah. And so one of the things that I would just want to reassure the audience is, if we all start to have the kinds of conditions and conversations where we know who we are and we know what we're functioning from. For example, one of the hardest things that we do as a company is help people to identify what they want to cause in this life, what they've always caused when they're at their best. They just freak out. They're afraid that they're going to fail at it or that it's too lofty or something. But once you know that, you can go through anything and know what you stand for. So it's even real basic things like living from purpose and values, which a lot of people haven't been taught how to do. I think some of you might remember one of my former podcasts, the woman on there said, look, I'm over 50 and I'm just now learning how to say, what am I feeling and what do I want? So there are a lot of things that go along with the speed of change that kind of force us into, am I going to crack up or am I going to recreate myself? And am I going to be strong enough to recreate myself and not be threatened by that? I can actually either look at that with excitement, like, oh my gosh, I get to become a different, better version of myself, or am I going to be afraid that now I'm outdated and I'm obsolete and nobody's going to want me anymore? Because I think a lot of people are going through that as they're almost forced into this forced change process, whether they wanted it or not.
Yeah, I mean, the remote work is the perfect example. So now you're working remotely and you're trying to cope with that, but then 6 months to 9 months to 12 months from now, the speed of technological change is exponential. That's what Murtech's law says. And there's already a disjunction between my human systems and my organization. And now the technology platform's growing. I have very little control over the technology because that's really being driven by the fourth industrial revolution and larger outside forces related to exponential technological growth. But what I can control and invest in right now is the human systems. So it's important to really have that stable because that's easier to invest in. And the reason why that's important right now is that every organization has a knowledge management system. It is the speed at which knowledge, insight, wisdom, training, practice kind of flows to each other. Technology augments that. Well, again, there's very little I can do to stop the speed of exponential technological growth. That's beyond us. New markets are emerging. We have drones delivering now. That's being piloted. We have all these things happening on the tech side. I can at least invest in the human side and in the human system. And in doing so, I stabilize that knowledge management system, because that knowledge management system is going to be disrupted if you have toxic workplace culture. It's going to be disrupted if you have stressed out employees who aren't able to focus on their jobs and learn new skills. There's still strategically some implementation protocol you can put in place, things like more productive and diverse onboarding, different learning adaptations. You can kind of ensure your knowledge management system is intact, but technology augments that. So in the techno-human ecosystem, I need you to be mindful of Mertek's law and how it's influencing your product and service line and your training platform, but also invest heavily in the human system, resiliency as a whole. Then we view both from an integrative standpoint, then we're going to build resiliency for both. And that's
It is both. It absolutely is both. You can't have the techno-human without the human part. And I think up until now, even still now, I would say, there's a lot of people that look at the human system as kind of a nice to have, not an absolute need to have. And they underestimate the amount of complexity that it really takes to have a healthy human system, more so every day. So it's not to scare anybody off by saying that. It's just that we underplay. Just like our technology is more complex, so is our human system's needs and requirements and understandings. And so what I see happening are that people are still kind of railing against, why do we have to learn all this human stuff? Because we really hadn't been taught it in the first place. We really haven't been taught to be resilient, agile, strong, and now it's a make or breaker. And the other thing I want to mention about systems themselves. So systems are simply the kind of organizing structures that save us time, energy, and money. Most people don't realize that only about 8% of the population even thinks in terms of creating systems and how to make them in such a way that they create competencies. And so when you couple that with the fact that very few people know how to build systems and very few people know how to build human systems, it's no wonder that more of us are really lacking in that area, and we don't even know how to admit it because we think everybody else around us knows what they're doing, and they don't. So that's a big, huge, I think a T for people is this illusion that everybody knows what they're doing, and none of us do. That's been the case for what I discover when I go in and work with companies. Most people are like, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to have that conversation. I didn't even know what I was feeling or thinking. There's so much there.
Yeah, the power distance index is a good example here because, you might have a high power distance index industry or organization, and you're so distant from your frontline staff. Well, who's going to see how things are changing faster than frontline staff? And so what I always recommend is taking a systems lens. And if you're trying to test a product or revision or tweak something to enhance your ROI, using a mixed methods design where you incorporate a lot of that live data feedback from your frontline staff, that can really be the make or break in terms of insights. But we can't even get there if I can't even have a conversation with you.
Exactly. That's why in our last episode, I had a business owner that had been using mentoring for like 3 or 4 years with our process, but they weren't yet using reverse mentoring where the manager mentors the staff and the staff turns around and mentors the manager. And they're now going to begin to incorporate that. And I really encourage that. And in our system, everybody is participating. Nobody's the keeper of the knowledge. Everybody is sharing equally and being empowered and being participants in the process, which is something that breaks down those artificial separations. That's what was so mind-blowing, that planes could literally crash because people were afraid to speak up to their authority figures. We got to break that whole set of artificial separation that happens within just about every structure that we are part of right now.
Yes, participatory-based projects is what I'll call them. In systems dynamic science, we have participatory-based research, which is basically we're coming in and we're trying to take a social problem. We bring in frontline staff. We ask all stakeholders for that problem, and we tell them to give us what's the cause. What's the cause of this, right? So, for instance, I might have gun violence, and I bring in youth who've had experience on the streets with gun violence. I bring in teachers, I bring law enforcement, and I bring in researchers. And we all kind of create a map of why that social problem is occurring. When we do that, I just don't have the criminal justice researcher saying, oh, well, this is going on because I've looked at all the quantitative data over time and for the United States. And I just don't have the teacher saying, well, it's this. We kind of come together and we bring all of our collective lenses to define what that problem is. And so, when you apply participatory methods in a business context, what you really do is take your frontline staff, who again see change faster than anyone else, and you take their insights and experiences and you use that to inform your decision making. And when you naturally build healthy workplace cultures and healthy relationships, that process kind of already happens. You don't have to operationalize it with a participatory design.
Yes, they become the creators of the whole process, and they become the people that say, hey, let's make this part of the way we operate. A couple of really cool ways we've done this as LifeWorks systems is we worked an entire education system where we worked with parents, teachers, administrators, and students all at the same time. They all had a common language. They all had common tools. The kids would go to school and have classroom meetings. They'd go home and have family meetings. The parents knew how to speak to the teachers about, how are we going to redirect negative behavior if we're not going to be using punishment and bribery and all the control models. When you say participative, I always want to say fully distributive. That means your frontline staff matter, but so do your middle people, and so do your high performers and your low performers. And in fact, what I see happen in the traditional system is that the higher the performer, the more that's invested in them. And it's really the underdevelopment of so much potentiality because we don't always include the whole and make it so deliberately participative on the part of everyone. Now, most people would think, well, we can't afford to do that. We don't have time and money to do that. But if you think about it, we all have time and money to have a cell phone now, right? There was a time where we would have thought that was insane to think that we could all have a cell phone. Well, the beauty in the techno part of techno-human is the techno gives us the advancements that allow us to have these human systems available to us easily. We have phone apps that we use so that when people learn how to communicate a certain way. Or I forgot how to do healthy venting instead of gossiping, but I have it right here on my phone. So there's no more excuses. Or, I really want to redirect this person's negative behavior and it's this one, but I don't remember how to do it. I can pull it up on my phone. And that's what the beauty is of having techno, the techno part of the equation. It's just that we're still thinking in a non-techno way about human systems. And it's really possible for all of us to have things at our fingertips.
Yeah, we can certainly augment our human systems from technology. The learning component is massive right now, especially the e-learning. At least right now, since remote work took live and higher education will forever be disrupted and reformed from this recent epidemic, we're going to see those e-learning and those mobile learning platforms kind of take off. And it will be a part of workforce training and onboarding to have those as pretty significant parts of your learning platform.
And even those things require a certain amount of study and best practices. For example, when we do our e-learning training, it's interactive. It's designed to appeal to the auditory, the visual, and the kinesthetic learner. It's not passive because so many things nowadays, people can put it on in the background and then they can be busy over here doing the laundry. Ours requires a direct interaction so that people are engaging. And then they go into a group review model where each person on the team takes turns leading the group's review session and has to prepare for it and has to, look at their leader guide and watch their group module and then lead the group. And that really causes people to have a level of agility that they didn't even know they didn't have. We don't know. The hardest part is what we don't know. And what I see when I oversee some of those kind of group sessions is that the weaker leaders tend to get rescued by the stronger leaders, and we have to go, no, this is where you need to encourage them to step up and to be strong and that they can do it. You don't want to take over for them and rescue them and exempt them. And so it becomes a natural pool of how do we develop leader-follower agility? And then how do we make sure that this is handled again a third time in mentoring, and then it's handled again in the way that the leaders and the committees and the teams build it into the operations of the business. That's when you take the best of techno and the best of human, and they're working in tandem.
Yeah, I agree.
So any other thoughts since we're about ready to wrap up here, Jacob?
Yeah, you mentioned rescuers. I think there's a real intentionality that comes behind growing as an organization and developing human systems. And I think that that's, we've talked about, well, you can do this and you can do that, and this is how this works and this. But at the end of the day, what that really boils down to is a decision for each and every member of that team to want to hold themselves accountable to overcome whatever barrier that is. It could be big T, it could be a repeated little t, it could be just them in the moment, to be a participatory member in that community at that organization or at that work, and be able to hold themselves accountable while also holding their peers and their supervisors accountable to what healthy dynamics and healthy relationships are. At the end of the day, it really is almost a vulnerability and a courage that's going to be the foundation for all this to thrive.
Yeah, I would say courage, vulnerability, and personal responsibility. And the only way people can be personally responsible is if they are committed to high levels of compassion and curiosity, and a huge drop, even an elimination of negative judgment and criticism, because we need to understand that we've had these human systems neglected for a long time. We can't be good at them until we learn how to walk first in them. And in order for people to feel that courage to be that personally responsible, we have to keep recognizing that they're often afraid to do that. I struggle with that after all this time, Jacob, that I'm so passionate about these changes. I'm so excited about the healing properties of these changes. I forget that sometimes people are freaked out by these changes that I'm asking them to do.
People are freaked out, and that's a pretty normative response when you take into consideration that they might have been bottling, as I mentioned way earlier, or they might be trying to avoid or trying to escape anything that might put them in experiencing whatever those negative feelings. The technical term is negative affectivity. The negative affectivity that they're kind of in when they experience that experience of having to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, we have found that this part of the system that we develop and deliver, it happens in month 4, where people are asked to identify who they are and what they're causing when they're at their best, which is purpose. What is your purpose? Like mine is to create a world where people love their lives, because I know whenever I've been at my best, that's what I just do naturally. It isn't even an effort. I just do it. I love doing it. I love helping people not only love their life, but love their life. But you wouldn't believe how much pushback we get in month 4 when that whole section comes up of identifying who are you at your best. I remember one time one of my customers said, well, gosh, if I read this whole process right, who I am at my best is causing greatness. That's like what the Dalai Lama does. And I said, who says you can't be like the Dalai Lama? But he literally was freaked out. For a long time, he could only say, I observe greatness, because it felt too weighty and too scary for him to own or put a stake in the ground for that, because he was probably too perfectionistic about, well, what if I fail at it? And it'd be better to put a stake in the ground and fail than to be afraid and not put a stake in the ground. But sometimes people have to just be aware first that they're scared. So that's kind of the microcosm of trauma, is being aware of our fear of our own power and our fear of our own responsibility. And it's actually, as Brene Brown would say, it's the gateway to joy and freedom.
And that can be from big T or little t.
Yes. The good news about big T and little t is they're always giving us opportunities to grow and learn and to strengthen something in us that would not otherwise be strengthened. And that's the good news of our topic today. Trauma-informed means let's be informed about how to treat one another despite some of the traumatic events that come up in our lives before and during and after pandemics. And so I want to thank you so much, Jacob. I always learn new things from you. I learned a few new terms in here that I want to write down, and I still need to have a conversation with you about neurodiversity and some of the other things you've recently raised. But I hope you'll come back again another time, because you just have so much knowledge, and you're one that just loves to study what the larger systems are and how those patterns play together. And you're really in that 8%, and I'm so glad to know you.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, Judy. Let's talk about why neurodiversity is needed right now.
Okay. Should that be one of our next topics, since we're out of time today?
Yes.
Okay. Jacob says he's going to do that with me. So I hope that you all can join us for that talk down the road. But I want to thank all my listeners for listening to LifeWorks today. The podcast today is brought to you by Lifeworks Systems and myself, Judy Ryan, the host. And my intent in this podcast is really to provide you with hope and to give you new ideas so that you have greater joy in your life. Please visit our website, subscribe to our podcast, and if you feel inspired by any of these podcasts, please give us a 5-star rating, because it really helps other people decide to listen to our podcast, and so we can help more people. So I end with inviting you, please join me in creating a world where all people love their lives and where you can grow masterful in making sure that your life works today. Thanks again, Jacob.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you for listening to LifeWorks Today. This podcast has been brought to you by LifeWorks Systems CEO and host Judy Ryan. The intent of this podcast is to provide you with hope and new ideas for greater joy in your life and work. For more information on our organization and earlier podcast episodes, related articles, videos, and more, please visit our website at lifeworksystems.com. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and mailing list. We invite you to join us in creating a world in which all people love their lives and where your life works today.